Okay, welcome to Unschooling Conversations. Today I'm joined by Rachel Evans from Connect and Respect. I'm Heidi Steel. I'm a former teacher and unschooling parent to 4 school-aged children who are happy living and learning as they go. I've been unschooling for almost 10 years, and you can find me on Facebook at Live, Play, Learn, where I provide daily support and encouragement for unschooling families. Today I'm joined by Rachel, and we are going to have an unschooling conversation on deschooling. So welcome, Rachel, to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you very much, Heidi, and thank you very much for asking me to come and talk and share my experience. I'm a mum of 2 boys. They are both home educated. My eldest is 12 and my youngest is 8. We have been home educating for about 5.5 years. My eldest has went to school for 3 years and my youngest has never been to school. So in terms of deschooling for them and my experience, I have 2 very different experiences by my 2 children. So I am sort of looking forward to it, sort of sharing what I've learned and what my journey has been with them and for myself.
Fabulous. So as you mentioned, you've had one child that was in school, whereas my children have never been in school. So our deschooling experiences will be quite different, I imagine. So it'll be really good to explore those a little bit during our conversation. But I thought maybe we should start by actually talking a little bit about what deschooling is and maybe why we do it and why our children need it.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think I can answer that question partly in sort of saying a bit more about my experience, because I think that brings us round to sort of why we do it. Is I was, before I had my boys, I was absolutely passionate about the schooling system and how amazing it was. It had served me, I felt, very well. And whilst I knew my eldest had a few challenges, I was absolutely determined that it was going to work and that's how it was going to be. And 3 years in, we were all broken. And I had to start a process of understanding what learning really looked like and how that was different from school and how to take that forward to find a better solution for us. And I think really that brings you to the heart of deschooling, is to really to understand and to educate yourself in the way learning really looks in the real world and how it can be done differently from school, and delayering all those assumptions that you have about how learning works, that you believe from when you're in the system, and to how it works in the real world. And I think deschooling, certainly for me, the biggest thing was for me, the deschooling for me. And that was the biggest challenge, because I had to come from passionately believing that the system worked to having to overthrow everything to see it differently.
Yeah, so there's this, particularly for us, this change in mindset, or this move, or even just challenging our schooled thinking and recognizing when questions come up or when we're viewing things through like a schooled lens almost, and challenging that and changing our mindset and somehow learning something new, learning a new way of life and a new way of learning.
Yeah.
And so deschooling ourselves in particular is about questioning our schooled thinking and finding another way of, or learning about and finding and embracing another way of learning and
living in many respects as well. I think it's really interesting. I was reflecting, we said we were going to talk about deschooling, and I was reflecting about my journey through that and what I thought deschooling would look like at the start, and how my view of deschooling has changed over the time that I've lost 5.5 years. So I decided to take my eldest out of school after 3 years. And I knew that we couldn't continue doing what we were doing because it wasn't working for any of us. But I'd heard of deschooling, but I still very much thought it was something that was done to and by the child. And whilst I was obviously open to new things, because I was opening to hoping to embrace home education, I just heard this old rule of thumb, one month for every year they've been in school. It could be longer if they've had a traumatic experience. And I was like, right, well, we deregistered in September, so I had this plan that we were gonna then, well, that 3 months that takes us to get past Christmas, let's start in the new year. And I had this plan that we were gonna be semi-structured, and we were gonna do sort of more formal stuff for English and maths and science, and everything else was gonna be child-led. And for those first 3 months, when I had no pressure on myself and I had let go, it was brilliant and it was fine. And from my point of view, from my perspective, I'll talk about his perspective in a minute. And I got to January and I'm like, right, this is when we know, we've deschooled now. This is what we're going to do. And the whole thing was a mess. I assumed that after this deschooling process that he would want to learn in a way that looked like school, that we'd healed from our experiences at school, and it had faded enough into the background that we could pick up school-like learning at home. And that just was not the reality of the situation. And that's when my deschooling journey really started for me, because I had to, we had a moment, I remember really vividly, I decided we were going to do about the skeleton. And he was absolutely not on board with this at all. And I was like, well, this is what we're going to do. And he said, no, you want to do this. I don't. And
wow.
it absolutely took me aback. And I suddenly realized that I had a plan of what I wanted this to look like. And that wasn't what was going to work. And that's when I really started understanding that I needed to really understand how he learned, how he was going to, what it was going to look like for him, and the things that he was interested in. And I have a nickname of Miss Clipboard for a reason, and I was going to have to completely let go, because certainly whilst semi-structured was going to work for me, it was absolutely not going to work for him. And that's when I had to really start to challenge all the assumptions about education and learning. And I had to really rebuild that trust and connection, because I realized by still having that view of I'm a parent going to do this to you, I was really not in the right place and space, and that was not going to work. And so I had to take a complete step back and reevaluate and rebuild that connection, that trust that had been lost by dragging a child to school, literally kicking and screaming every day, because that's what a good parent did according to school. And and it was so unbelievably damaging. And so given that 3 months where I had no expectations, and it had been, relatively comfortable and working well, I had to go back and look at a new solution and a new way of doing things. And that's when I began to read a lot and spend quality time with him and connect with him and understand how he worked and what was interesting for him, and just living and having fun. And I know what the biggest amount of deschooling has come from me by far. Because I think the children generally just providing, you have to deschool yourself to create an environment where they can move forward. And for me, the more I thought, what can we do to support our children? I'm like, actually, most of the deschooling is about me. Yeah. It's about my journey.
Because the thing is, if we don't do it, we then bring that baggage to their learning and to their environment. And then we start putting pressure on them or expectations on them, or we start saying, well, I think you should be doing this worksheet.
And it in front of them. Bring school stress straight back into the home, which is a large part of what we home educate to avoid.
Exactly. So that whole, so for us to do the work so that our children get on with learning.
I also thought there'd be a finite end point to deschooling. They'd be like, one day, hello, we're done. And that, again, it's been a gradual process for me over a period of years. And at every new stage, I think it was interesting in one of your podcasts, you were talking about exams and teenagers. It really made me think, because I have another level of deschooling to challenge when I get to these next stages. And so it is an ongoing process.
It's interesting, really. You mentioned several things, which is there's actually, and I agree with you, this distinction between our children deschooling and us deschooling. And maybe in a minute we can talk a little bit more about the process for children.
Yeah.
But this idea that, so similar to you, even though my children had never been to school, in the early days, I had this idea that maybe even though my children were free to choose what they did and play for as long as they wanted to, that actually eventually, I had this idea eventually that would turn into some sort of school-like project, you know, or there would be some school-like learning in that they might choose to sit down and look at a workbook, for example. And so it was my own deschooling that was really important, as I was personally challenged, like yourself, when my children didn't want to do those things at all, ever. You know, so, and like that process for adults, that there is an idea that, you know, 1 month for every school year that children have been in, that they need this period of time to adjust from leaving school to sort of beginning, say, home education or unschooling. But it does seem to me, from my experience, similar to what you've said, that it isn't this finite moment where we stop deschooling and start, you know, our home educating journey, our unschooling. But one of the things that does happen, I think, is that we get better at it. We get better at recognizing maybe a schooled thought or something that we might class as being on the hidden curriculum. So something that we implicitly learned from school that we were previously unaware of. And we get better at recognizing when those questions arise within us, or when we have feelings about something that we, you know, that are causing us to maybe not be connected to our child, but actually turn us away from our child, because we're thinking, oh, hang on a minute, they should be doing X, Y, and Z by now because their peers are, or because, you know, for a key moment for me, for example, was when my eldest would have been moving into secondary school, and suddenly I had a time of going through, oh, hang on a minute, the children going to secondary school are doing X, Y, and Z right now, and my child is doing, you know, A, B, and C. I think we get better at recognizing it in ourselves, and think going through the process and challenging and you know, reaching out and finding the answers that we need, that aren't sort of schooled answers, that are more in line with what our children are actually doing, and how to reconnect us to our children and be confident in what we're actually doing.
Absolutely, I would completely agree with that. Yeah, and it is. I would very much say it's an ongoing, evolving process. But yeah, I'd agree. It absolutely does get easier over time. Very much so. And I think you have the more you go on, you have a clearer picture of the kinds of things that are working, and therefore you build up a support network and a bank of resources. So it becomes a more natural way of thinking and doing life and doing learning.
So so your eldest, for example, went to school, so had a schooled experience, which your youngest and my children didn't have. So what can we expect to see from our children, if you can remember, during that period where your child was actually deschooling and sort of, you know, taking time to decompress and disconnect from school? What kind of things did you notice that he went through?
It's quite interesting, because I was reflecting back on this, and I suddenly remembered, like when we first came out of school, and he was quite anxious to have things like carpet time, so things that he was associated with school and learning. And whilst obviously that, even if I had a plan, that was not part of my plan, I actually did get some squares of carpet for him, and I left them with him, saying that, when you feel like doing this, then we can do some carpet time if you want. And and it was actually a really quick process, because he was literally a matter of week, maybe a couple of weeks, where he very quickly dropped that need for it looking like school. And in many respects, I think he deschooled far quicker than I did. I think because I'd set that 3 months where we were going to spend time and we were just going to connect and we were going to play games. And I also at the same time dropped the restrictions around screens, because up to that point I was extremely tight in terms of the time that he was having on screens. So lots of things were changing in the background as well, and he did, a natural consequence, as we know, when you take a restriction off something, they're going to go and binge and gorge on it, because they're going to try and make the most of it in case that restriction comes back again. So, but he really did. Literally within a couple of weeks, he'd dropped all that notion of it needing to look like school, and it needed to have carpet time to make. And he was used to that structure, and at that time, it was making him feel secure. But actually, in a very, very quick space of time, he didn't need that anymore. But we did move into an awful lot of watching his favorite programs and films, and exploring different apps and on the iPad, and watching videos. And looking in many respects, he deschooled very quickly. But I would say the other part of the deschooling is being released from the trauma that is, because for him school was a traumatic experience. And we in that respect, there is a legacy that's still today, where anything that looks like school will be, you can feel that anxiety, it hits back straight away, it brings it all back. And I've over the years, it's been interesting to watch. He doesn't even realize he's learning half the time. He doesn't realize he's just playing, he's just learning, he's just living, he's just doing the things he's passionate about. It's only with perspective that I can look back and say, yeah, look, his reading is really improved, because he's been, watching anime with subtitles on, or, all these things that, and all these skills have come together. And he's, as far as he's concerned, he's just playing and living. But I've been able to see that change. But no, he dropped the school structure and the school mindset seemingly relatively quickly. But it's going to be interesting, I think, because as we're getting more towards the point that you're saying, where children in school will be doing GCSEs, it'll be interesting to see whether any of that school stuff resurfaces. So at the moment, he's kind of, he's sort of dropped that expectation of himself that that's the way we do things. But he has talked about what I'm going to do in the future. And it'll be interesting to see whether some of that school thinking will resurface, and we'll need to look at that again.
Yeah, it's because, even when we've removed ourselves from school, and we unschool our children, so that's quite far removed from school, I would say, we still live in a society that is heavily influenced by schooled things. So, for example, when our children are really young, and it's possible that they could be joining reception year one, so joining school, a lot of children's TV programs are about, the subject matter is about going to school and how amazing this is and how great it is and how you get your own lunchbox, and they talk through all the, the things to help prepare children who are going to school. But like you say, later on, that can surface throughout. It's like just in the fact that life is, the yearly calendar is structured around term times. There is a difference in our lives between when children are at school and when children are on summer holidays, and that has an impact on us as a family.
Yes.
But like you say, when we get to older children, you know, working out, right, how am I going to enter the world of work? How am I going to showcase my skills and my passions and what I'm good at? And recognizing, you know, they recognize that in school children take exams, and working through, you know, what are my actual options. You know, that is one option, and that's how you can choose to do it if you need to, but actually talking around other options as well. But one of the things you mentioned there was school trauma, which I, again, is part of the deschooling process, I think. But I think when you've got a child that has experienced school trauma, that elongates the deschooling process, and that whilst they might have deschooled from general things like structure or what learning should look like, that then you get these sticking points that are connected to the school trauma experience that your child has had. So, for example, reading is quite a common one where children have been told that they're failing at reading, been pressurized, been made to do over, and I saw this as a teacher, you know, being taken out of lessons that they enjoy and love and can engage with really happily and easily, and they're taken out of those lessons to go and do more reading, which they hate and they're really struggling with, because they're not developmentally ready.
Well, that method doesn't work for them, you know.
That
only
method
one method
doesn't
to teach reading in school, and that's phonics. And not every child, you know, can learn that way.
Yeah, and then they have this association with reading that actually impacts their life for years to come. So in the home setting, when you're unschooling, as soon as you mention, you know, going to the library or, you know, reading a book, or anything to do with reading, it then sort of triggers this traumatic memory, you know, the anxiety that you mentioned, and it can take a really long time for children to heal from that experience and redefine
what it means for them, how it works
for them, and how they interact with that.
Talking about reading, that's really interesting, because you just reminded me, because my eldest loved stories, loved books. It was he would ask to be read to, and also he was reading at a sort of basic level when he first went to school. It was one of the saddest outcomes of his 3 years at school, was that by the time he left, he hated reading, absolutely hated it, and literally wouldn't pick up a book. I didn't want anyone to read to him either. And my deep intuition was to leave it alone, to not push it, because it would come back, because I knew he loved books so much. And I think sometimes, you know, particularly when you deschool, and particularly if you then fluidly move into unschooling, sitting on your hands and trusting the process is one of the hardest things to learn to do. But I was absolutely rewarded, because he did start reading again, and he did, and actually he Japanese manga and anime are his massive passions, and he has now gone through hundreds and hundreds of chapters of manga, and you know, and he has even picked up, you know, fiction books, and he's researching and learning all the time, and reading comments and on podcasts and blogs and whatever he's researching, and so his reading is there. And he is gradually desensitizing himself to the idea of reading, and actually it has absolutely come back, and still today, in what he does today, you can see that stories and books are his big passion. But it's taken, what I would say, it took 4 years.
I was going to ask you, because this is one of the things you talk about, sitting on your hands and sort of trusting that process, you know. So you talked about trusting your intuition, but which is something that we're taught not to do in schools. So even trusting ourselves and our own intuition, trusting our children, trusting the healing process that they're going through, sitting on our hands. And I was going to say to you, just as a benchmark, how long did that take? Because what we expect is, we'll just take this 1 month for every year in schools, and then they'll be healed from their school trauma, and it just, in my experience, and research and talking to other people, it just doesn't work like that. It takes so much longer, and we live in a world where everything's really fast paced, and you have to be up to speed, and you have to be healthy to function in the world, and you're supposed to heal really quickly, but actually deep healing takes years. So I'm glad that you quantified that for
and
us.
Actually, we have a similar experience with physical penmanship. That was massively traumatic too, and we are still very much on our healing journey with that, and I think it's going to take a long time. But my reassurance with listening to how his numeracy has developed and how his reading has developed, I'm confident that he will find his way through that when he's ready, and I will support him in whatever. We can make things more accessible, and we can work around things, but it'll become, particularly with some of the challenges he's got, it will come through him, and it'll in order to work in the world, which he wants to do, that he will find a way when he's good and ready to do it. And trusting that process, is that learning to trust that process is part of the deschooling, I think, that we have to do as parents.
And you mentioned, that he has this motivation that he wants to work in the real world, and that's one of the things in our envisaging learning, is one of the things, particularly with unschooling, is that their motivation, it becomes intrinsic.
Absolutely.
That they find a reason to re-engage with reading in a way that is meaningful for them, and that is what aids their learning. It aids, particularly with deschooling and trauma, like we're talking about, it aids in their healing. And you've also mentioned a few things during our conversation that I just wanted to maybe highlight, which is about sort of practically, what do we do during the period of deschooling? So as we're deschooling ourselves, and as our children are deschooling, and we're not doing school, what are we doing?
So thinking back to that, we spent a lot more time together, and I was understanding what he enjoyed doing and joining him in doing that. So I learned to play Minecraft, and not only is that it's building that, say connect and respect is kind of is what I'm about, and that, I would say, that's what it is. It's about connecting with them, it's about building that relationship, it's about building their self-esteem, it's about giving them access to things that you think they will enjoy, but without any pressure to do so. It's about understanding the things that they're really passionate about, and showing them that that's just because it doesn't look like school, that's still valid, and it's still, you're still going to give it the attention and the green light almost, that it's okay if what they're passionate about doesn't look like school, and to give them that confidence and build that relationship that you will support in whatever way it is. While still, we did lots of day trips, met people, and again that was a bit of a it took a while to get into to meeting people, having the confidence to do that, but we did it at our own pace. And it's building that connection and learning to read your child, I think, rather than, oh, we should be doing this that's going on in your head. It's saying, what do I need to do with my child? What, he didn't want an awful lot of going to groups and things, but we started to build some individual friendships to start to make that easier. So it literally, for me anyway, it was about connection and healing and rebuilding that trust. And going with and doing the things with him, playing with the train sets, and building in Minecraft and learning that, and exploring that with him.
So it's just yeah, I like the idea of just connecting with our children and pushing aside the shoulds in our head that say we should be doing this or we should be doing that, but actually spending time and getting to know our children, becoming in tune with them. I know there's probably some listeners out there who will need to spend time repairing relationships between themselves and their children, where they've gone through a period of, I mean, I know you mentioned earlier, you know, they've felt they needed to force their children to go to school, and that's caused, you know, a significant rift in their relationship. So spending time with your children, just doing the things that your children love doing, you know, like you said, playing Minecraft. We all have Minecraft accounts in our house, and we quite frequently play together. You know, day trips to places that they actually want to go to.
Not that you necessarily, and things that you don't necessarily think, oh, that'll be educational for them. These are the things that they will love doing. These are the things that we can share together and build memories and build those experiences. And of course, we know as we go through our deschooling process, and so ours like to seamlessly into unschooling, you realise that there is so much learning in everything that you do, and whether it's classified as educational or not. But it's interesting. You just reminded me of something about a year in. To our home education. I remember he came downstairs one morning and he suddenly declared, right, today I am going to do this and this and this and this and this. And I went, I think we've just deschooled. Because I was suddenly, he had taken ownership, rather than school is quite, for children, it's a very passive thing. It's done to them. And they are given the schedule and they're given the things that they need to do and they just execute them. And then, you know, whereas when, particularly if you're unschooling, it's a very different mindset. And it's about, for me, it's about taking that personal responsibility and understanding and managing your own time, that self-motivation, that intrinsic motivation. And I remember that classic moment, and I kind of went, whoa, you know, that as a real shift. And, you know, for me, that was like, okay, I think we've kind of, and it was about a year into it. And I thought, actually, now I can see now the difference between passing time or you know, just to something actively taking control of. And his effectively his learning, for him, it was still about play. It was still about watching his favorite YouTubers, and he was playing this video game. But we now know that there's learning in all of those things, but he was actively taking control of the things that he wanted to do that day. And for me, that was a massive step forward in terms of our healing from school and our deschooling process, for mine and for him as well.
So there's this idea that you've picked up on there, that so one of the things that happens in deschooling is our children have been in school and their time has been managed, their learning has been managed, you know, how long they can spend on an activity has been managed, when they can eat has been managed, when they can, you know, go and use the bath, everything's
Absolutely.
managed, you know. So there is definitely this period, which is obviously deschooling, whereby our children move from having everything managed for them to them, like you were just saying, taking ownership and saying, this is what I want to do, this is how I want to spend my time. But when children first leave school, it's not an automatic flip. They don't kind of wake up the next morning and go, right, I know what I'm going to do. And a lot of the things that we've just given as examples of what to do during this period are really sort of active examples. But one of the realities is that children can kind of say, no, I don't want to do that. I'm fed up of being told what to do and when to do it. And now I'm not at school, I recognise that that's not what I want, and it's not, and now I've got this opportunity to say no, because you know, you're not telling me what to do and when to do it. So there can be a period of time where our children appear to be restless, bored, unmotivated, and in the culture that we live in, that commonly, depending on the age of your child, can mean that they spend quite a lot of time in bed.
Yes.
They spend quite a lot of time watching TV or playing computer games, which might not be the way that you had imagined even deschooling would be, you know, because so we've given very practical examples of, you know, we can take them out for the day, or we can, you know, play games with them, and they might quite frankly just turn around and say, no, I don't want to do those things. So expanding on that a little bit, what would you say, or what would your advice be to listeners who find themselves in this position where their children seem disengaged and not motivated to go to the swimming pool or go to the beach or go to the library and choose some books? What would you say to them?
Don't panic. Just, you know, don't panic. Try to relax. Try not to have that voice in your head that, well, they should be doing this and they should be doing that. Try to keep your own anxiety and worries in check, and to trust that it will, and to keep the options open to them. I mean, it's interesting you talk about boredom, because that is I've had a tricky relationship with accepting boredom, and actually whilst they're bored and they're restless and they're wandering around, they don't know what to do, and you think, I should need to fix this, I need to give them, and actually I have learnt over the years to say to him, he actually comes to me now and says, I'm bored, and I said, well, I can't fix that for you. If you want to do something with me, I will do anything that you would like to do, but I can't fix your boredom for you, and that has to come from you. And actually, whilst it's uncomfortable in the few days generally that it is, I also know, I'm also a little bit excited because I know something is going to change, and that he will work through it, and he will find something new to engage himself, and that will spur a new phase, a new interest. So it is about being there, supporting, validating your children that it's okay. We all have periods and times where we are less engaged and less motivated, but trust and support them, and to know that it's fine, and they will move through it. We've been through this many times now, and every single time, you know, but when I've recognized those phases within him, I have given myself a talking to, but I have also opened up options such as say, well, I'm actually going to go for a walk today. Do you want to come? And he might say no. So, well, actually, I sometimes feel better when I've been out for a walk, and I feel clearer headed, and I feel like I'm more motivated about things. So it's about, when I say sitting on your hands, it's not about doing nothing. It's about sitting on your hands and not trying to force it or manipulate it or coerce it. Yeah. It is about, so even when they appear to be underneath their covers and they're, you know, it's about leaving those options open and knowing that they can come, that they know that you will support them and that they will come to you, you know, and keeping that lines of communication open.
Yeah, I think it can be quite a tricky thing for us to not interfere, but still be present and still have options open for them at the same time. It's quite a skill that we need to learn ourselves as the adults. And one of the things that it reminded me of as you were talking was that periods of restlessness and boredom, and again, so thinking about school thinking, we're so used to thinking that learning happens, so the active part of learning happens in school hours, so between 9 and 3, and that you take regular breaks, so you have, you know, like a lunch hour, and it's okay to have a dip then and then. And actually life doesn't look like that when you start to respond to your own natural ebbs and flows. So you might find that as you go on and you know, do seamlessly continue into unschooling, that, you know, your child might have a particular restful period in the mornings, and that is just how their body is, and then in the afternoons they sort of start to be more active and engage in stuff, and then you know, individuals have different sleeping, rest, wakeful periods, and that's sort of reflected in how they engage in activities on a day-to-day basis. But similarly, you can have periods of days where children are absolutely immersed in something, and they're just flying, they're just they're just taking off. Whatever it is that's captured their attention just consumes them for days, and then after that you can see like a plateau or a dip, which similarly can take days, and it just doesn't look like school.
Exactly.
So as we're talking about deschooling, it's about recognizing that there are lots of things that we are taught in school. So for example, learning happens between the hours of 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. Or that learning happens in this gradual, steady, upward motion.
And linearly across all areas, because that certainly is my experience, is that particularly with my younger one, it's been more evident. He will go through a period where you can see that it's all about the numbers, it's all about that's what he's drawn to, and then he might drop that completely and be drawn to more sort of literacy based stuff, and it's really not. It's not linear, and it's the school that said all these areas move at this pace all the time, nice little schedules, is just not how it really works when in the real world.
Yeah. So that process of for us as adults, so kind of harking back to where we started, really, for us as adults to question, what does learning look like? How do we as humans naturally acquire knowledge and skills? And during this period of deschooling, for us as well, to really seek to understand more about unschooling, about connection, connection with our children, about how it works practically, about how learning works, to do our own research in whatever form suits you. So buy the books or watch YouTube, listen to podcasts, connect with other families that are ahead of you on the journey, so that you can absorb information from them and actually get a really good understanding of what I was going to say, what real life actually is like, what life outside of school
is. Exactly, because actually I think this going back slightly to what I was saying before, is this idea that that again, it comes from school, is that you have this very linear processed way of doing things, and that's the aim. The aim is to be at this point all the time. And actually, I think one of the things that I found very valuable, and it's part of the deschooling and unschooling journey, is that to learn for them to be self-reflective and to understand when they're having a dip. And that's okay, because that's normal human emotion. It's a normal human pattern. Whereas in school, it would just be managed, and they're not allowed, they have to sort of stay here. And actually, for them to be able to actually, I am feeling, a bit restless or a bit down, it's because of this. I'm between things that I'm interested in, and that it's okay, and that they develop their own strategies for moving forward. And also, I think it's also interesting that my experience has been is when they have these periods of sort of downtime, restless time, you don't know what's going on in their heads. You don't know what they're thinking about. Sometimes I don't think they know. They're not consciously aware of what's going on. And actually, you'll suddenly see a huge step forward in something. You think, yeah, that's what that was all about. It's just because I think that's the other thing about deschooling is realizing that school learning is very visual. You can see the progress, you monitor the progress. I think part of your own deschooling process is to realize that actually a lot of real learning is hidden from view. And it gets more so as they get older. So with little ones, it's very easy to see their reading skills coming on. As they get older, those skills that they're developing are less obvious. And part of our deschooling is to let go, that we have to see the progress and we have to be able to monitor the progress, because that's a very schooled notion.
Yeah, I mean, I like to use the example with the way that me and my son will both watch the same film, and I will sit, and for me it's a way to relax, and it's a very calm, my own experience of, you know, particularly what's going on in my mind is quite low key. I'm just there to sort of immerse myself in the story, and sometimes I might learn something if you know, if it's based in a particular time or culture, or you know, but really I'm there just to, you know, relax and enjoy. My son, however, loves films. I love films, but what he loves is well, he loves dissecting them. He loves picking out all the errors in films. He wants to know how all the special effects are done. He wants to know about the camera angles. He wants to know about, you know, all the different actors and what other films they've been in. He wants to know, he just like, when he is watching a film, he is asking a million questions, and there is so much going on in his mind compared to my, I'm just here for the experience of watching a movie. You know, our experiences are completely different.
Yeah.
But anybody who's watching us, we're both sat there watching the same film.
Yeah.
They can't, you know, that example of what you were saying, you can't tell just by observing what is going on in an individual person's mind. And the other thing you mentioned was about how, you know, often our children can't tell. One of the things that was happening in the period of time when I was in school was talking about making learning explicit. So for teachers to say to children, this is exactly what we are learning today. At the end of this lesson, you will have learnt, I don't know, how to multiply fractions. And to be really explicit in every single lesson about what you were teaching.
The learning objectives were.
Yes, what you were teaching them. Not now, and this is where I really started, or one of the things I started to unpick, because it was about what you were teaching them. It wasn't about what they were learning. And what you were trying to do was be explicit about what you were teaching them so that they would explicitly learn that piece of content. Anyway, we can unpick that all we like, but what happens when our children are unschooling is they might reflect on something and say, wow, I've learned how to code, you know, or I learned how to read the word mum today. But they don't always know what they're learning, and they don't always set out with these ideas about what they're going to learn. They just live their life, they engage with the things they're passionate about, and they learn, as you know, naturally as they go, which I think I said in my introduction, happy living and learning as they go. It's just something
you do. And I think it's you can give the same child, two children, the same experience, the same information, and because their mental models of the world will be different, and they will, as you say, they will take from it very different things, either explicitly or implicitly, and not actually understand that that's what they've done. And actually, I think it's interesting that I often realize how much particularly my older one has learned when we talk and discuss things. And he, you know, he's like manga and anime are his passions, and you know, he will talk about the quality of the artwork and how it's changed between season to season in a book or a series or whatever. It all depends on what their mental model of the world looks like, and often their learning is, I don't think he knows that's what he's been learning about, but it only becomes obvious when we have a conversation about it. I go, where did that all come from? And you know, he can't tell you, oh, till today I learned about the art style. You know, that's not how, I don't think that's how real learning actually works.
No. And it goes back to what we were saying about learning not being linear, because our children all have very individual experiences of the same world. You know, I have 4 children, they live in the same house with the same parents, but how they experience the world is unique to them, even if they have slightly similar experiences, but then their learning is connected, there's that word again, connected to their experience of the world and how they then interpret and absorb new information, shapes their learning. It's not linear. It's not my children are all learning the same thing at the same time, even if their experiences day to day are the same. Their learning is actually unique to them.
Yeah. And I've got two very different children. My older one, he will watch something once or read something once. That's it. He is kind of taken it in, and that's my younger one will watch the same episode of something time and time and time again. And like my older one doesn't say, how would he do this? And I'm like, that's just the way he learns. And he's taking something different from it every single time that he watches an iteration of something. And I think, you know, again, part of our deschooling process is to understand that learning looks different for every child. And even if you, when you unschool or you choose a particular methodology, in our case, unschooling, the unschooling of each individual child will be completely different. And we need to, that's part of our deschooling process, is to understand that whereas school learning will look the same for every child, but particularly when you unschool, even the learning will look very, very different for those individual children.
Which again harks back to us talking about connecting with your child, getting to know your child, being in tune with your child, you know, going through that process of trial and error, you know, what works, what doesn't, you know, observing them, just taking time, listening to them, listening to the things that they say, I want to do this, and enabling that to happen and being their facilitator so that they can explore and achieve and investigate the things they want to, and listening to them say no, you know, listening to them and being okay with that, offering them stuff without expectation, you know. And that, again, I'm sure that is part of our own deschooling, the idea that as adults, you know, we should offer these fantastic experiences to our children and they should jump up in the air and say, yeah, that's amazing, and sometimes they do, sometimes we get it just right and they do, but other times they don't. And being okay with the fact that, you know, children, our children have said no to something that we have.
To not take it personally. It's not a personal thing. And actually what I think is also interesting is just because they've said no now doesn't mean they'll say no in the future. And I have so many times where I have offered something or suggested something and it's been an automatic no, it tends to be in my house, but actually at some point a few months down the line they'll go, oh, can we do that? And, you know, so it is about not, you know, it's staying open-minded, not taking it personally, and you're all learning together. And I think that's the other thing I was going to say about deschooling is that I think one of the things that I learned is through my process of deschooling, I learned to love learning again, and I found my passions again. And I think our children learn far more by modeling and observing behavior being modeled than by telling them something. And so I think when we deschool ourselves, the additional benefit is that we start to love learning, we get curious, we start researching, we start following our passions. And even if they don't follow that passion, they see real life learning and in action. And I think that is another of the massive benefits of really going through the deschooling process. And it's not just about opening your mind to the new ways of learning. It's about enjoying it. Because I went through the whole way through school. I ended up with a master's degree. I had all these years in school. I hated learning by the time I finished. I absolutely hated it. But it's only been through my process, this process, the last 5.5 years, that I've understood what I'm passionate about. I've understood how I like to learn. I've understood what motivates me. And it's been not just and I'm now wanting to pass that to my children and give them, I don't want them to be saddled with the years worth of school problems that I had. And I want them to know who they are and to understand how they work, and how they're motivated, and to take that forward without that strict and rigid schooled thinking.
So I feel like our next conversation is going to really be about unschooling ourselves.
Yeah.
So today we've talked about deschooling. So just to recap a little bit, so sort of taking that time to allow our children to deschool, and that really being central to the success of their learning journey. So it is part of the healing process, and also recognizing that as adults we have our own deschooling process to go through, which, as we mentioned, can be longer, and can sort of resurface itself multiple times over the years. But you've sort of moved on there a little bit into what it means for us to come to the end of our deschooling journey, or maybe not the end, but how that then flows into unschooling, which is really, for me, about unschooling ourselves. So I feel like we could maybe get together again and talk about that sometime.
I would love that. Yeah, that'd be great.
Well, thank you for joining me today. It's been really lovely.
Thank you.
We are going to chat again sometime. I can feel it. And listeners can join me next month when I talk to PDA extraordinaire Harry Thompson on the benefits of unschooling for neurodivergent children. So thank you for joining me this week, Rachel.